This morning we're going to talk about a subject, and I don't want you to run out the door when I say the word, but the word is covering. Amy, put up the definition there, honey. The word covering means to place something over, on, or upon as for protection, concealment, or warmth. Covering means to protect, to shield, to embrace, and the last one is to provide. Covering. In today's world, I believe what we see is that covering has become a missing link in our families, in Christendom, and in our culture. I want to say that one more time. Covering has become a missing link in our families, in Christendom, and in our culture. Listen to what 1 Peter 4:8 says. He says, above all, keep fervent in your love for one another, because love covers a multitude of sins. A gentleman by the name of Matthew Henry, who went through the whole entire Bible and wrote commentaries, said this, made this statement: a family without government or covering is like a house without a roof, exposed to every wind that blows. Thus we see the picture in many situations of our Christian homes, our American homes. A gentleman by the name of William Thayer said this: as our family, so is society. If well ordered, well instructed, and well governed, they are springs from which go forth the streams of national greatness and prosperity, of civil order and public happiness. Families, what is going on in families, we see in our public places now. We see drive-by shootings. You can look at Chicago. You can look at all kinds. You can even come to Franklin and see in the small town America now that, you know, when I was a kid, we walked home after dark from the movie, from the church, from this, that, and the other. Life is not casual anymore. And it is, one of the main reasons is because of the breakdown of families, because covering, the God-given covering, has been removed, forsaken. The reason I talk about culture is because of the unbridled conditions facing our families and churches, and the moral deterioration of our culture as a whole. The thing about covering that we're going to see in all this, if the husband is functioning as a covering for his family, and his wife or his children refuse it, an unholy alliance begins to take place. It really takes the entire family working together and coming under God's covering, the Father's covering, for it to work correctly. And then, if the wife is desiring to come under the husband's covering and there isn't one, then in a sense legalism can rear its ugly head. And the children begin to respond like the mother does to the father. Y'all know, we can look at television now, and it's like the father, in many cases, the husband and father is like this kind of dingbat, you know, and the mother is the best friend of the kids and all of this kind of thing. But this is not the way. This is not the normal Christian family. And this is our fight in this world today. As Larry spoke yesterday, Christ is the head of man. Man is the head of woman. God is the head of Christ. This was his order, his covering. And while Jesus walked on this earth, he walked in submission under the covering of God. I love this psalm. Psalm 137 says this: the writer poses a poetic and profound question. He cries out this in exile. He says, how can we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? I want to say that again. How can we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? When I read this psalm a couple of years ago, I thought that's exactly what God has called us to do. We are to live and move and have our being in strange lands now, whether you're from Puerto Rico or any other country. We live in America. We Christians in many ways live in a strange land. But we are to continue singing the Lord's song, meaning we're to live in his ways. We're to go against the tide that is so rudely pounding us every day. Just a couple of things that the melody of the Lord sounds like. Number one, we possess a moral code. When that tidal wave of immorality is coming against us, we hang on to the moral code of God. We shake our hands, as Isaiah says, we shake our hands at a bribe. But now we live in a country where, again, we just look at our government. You can bribe, no, we shake our hands at a bribe. We place our marriage and family in its rightful place against a tide that shows the opposite way. We are kind. We feed the poor. We help the orphan. Our list can go on and on. We're to comfort those who need comforting. And most of this goes against that tsunami coming against us every day. But before God, we must continue to sing the song of his ways in our homes and our families if our faith is to survive. Okay, here we go. We're going to talk about covering. Covering begins in the womb. God gave the womb as a covering for life, where nourishment, protection, where growth was to take place in humans and in animals. But it is very important that this be kept intact. But what has happened is that the godly meant covering for the womb has been invaded. In America, 60 million little ones have lost their covering. The word feed us. Now, when all of this, there goes my microphone, Larry. The word fetus in Latin means little one. And y'all, I was about 22, 23 years of age when the Roe versus Wade thing started. And this is what we were told. It's nothing but a fetus. That was the message coming across our televisions and radios every day. So years later, when I find out what the word fetus means, it means that 60 million little ones have lost their covering and are still losing it today. The next stage of life is when our girls, I've got it here because I'm a girl, when our girls and boys are in their early years. It's meant to be a time where they know the father's strong arms. They know the nurturing of a mother. That fatherhood and motherhood cover these little. It's the stage where our children begin to get an identity. They begin to receive an identity from their parents. It is a wonderful, wonderful time, and should be a wonderful time of innocence, of just God-given innocence. But what has happened in the American ways, and I'll say even in Christian homes, and our churches in many ways have accepted it. The young children now, they see strange men, strange women coming into broken homes. They begin to watch things on television as a little one that they're not ready for. Their innocence is invaded by selfishness. And at their young lives, they don't know. They think it's normal. There's been a family where these 3 children, the mother is on the third marriage, and she's leaving the 3rd husband now. And these children just think that's normal. That's the way it works. But in the Lord, it was never meant to be that way. They're covering. They don't even know what it means. And really, we can almost add this to it as the children begin to grow, 8, 9, 10-year-olds. We're living in a world now where phones, I'm amazed when I go to the mall at these children who are 11, 12, 13, pulling out credit cards at the phone place, in the middle of the mall. And what we're seeing here, even here in our little town, children making suicide pacts in middle grade. Imagine. It is not to be that way. This is truly they're at a turning point in many, many ways. Now we have parents who come in here, and their children are already texting unbelievable things. Pornography is beginning at a very early age now. And it's really shocking. Even our kids' ages, they're in their early 40s now. But it's changed. They even say in the last 5 years, what has happened. But I hate for it to sound so negative, but that is what we're up against as parents. And so you see their covering at their ages has been stolen from them. The next stage of life, oh wow, and it is going into the teen years. We had 4 teenagers at once. We had 4 of everything at once. But 4 teenagers at once. Teenage years are a time where we really need to be involved in their lives, not just with a set of rules, but we need to be involved in their activities, be a part of knowing where they are, all of that sort of thing. When Larry and I were teenagers, there was a place called the River, and the River was where some of the teens would go and park. Well, we had a good friend. I'll call her Mary Ann, just for the sake of a name. But her mother, Mary Ann, did not show up one night when she was supposed to at curfew. So what does her mother do? She goes down to the river with a flashlight and looking for Mary Ann. So she shines it in this car. No, this isn't Mary Ann. No, no, no. Well, suddenly she spots Mary Ann's boyfriend's car. So she goes over with the flashlight, shines it in there, and he jumps up and he says, "Oh, I promise you, Miss James, this isn't Mary Ann." She said, "It better not be." Now, this was the talk at school on Monday. But you see, it didn't mean that our culture, it was far from perfect. Because our culture really was, our generation really was, through the 60s, the one that issued in a lot of the bad things that go on. But parents, they took out flashlights back in the day. But now we have teenagers who aren't afraid of the law. They don't have a father at home to pull them out of a gang, to pin them down, to say, "No, I don't know how we're going to live, but this isn't the way we're going to do it." So covering through those teenage years is so very, very important. We don't step back. We continue to step into their lives. Let me add to this. I think I'm missing one. Is college, university life. My parents' generation, when they were ready for university, most of them went off to war. The men did. The women took up the jobs, all this kind of thing. So when our generation, we were the baby boomers. We were conceived after the men got home from war, married and conceived and all that. Well, our parents thought they were sending us into the same culture that they had been sent. That you fought for what is right, that, they didn't get to go to college, they wanted their kids to go and everything like that. Well, we all went to college, but my two sisters and I, we had a grand old time. It wasn't so much about academics and that sort of thing. We just had a good time. Well, when our kids came along, Larry and I decided, we're here in a ministry. We're going to have 4 kids in college at once. We were blessed to have a couple come in and help us financially put our children through college. But this is the conclusion we came to. We said, you know what? You get to go to college for 1 semester. And they go. And at the end of that semester, hey, guess what? If you're doing well morally, spiritually, and academically, guess what? You get to go back again. So we put strong boundaries around our children as they went into college, because I can tell you, 2 of our nephews became alcoholics the first year they were there. When parents arrive at the school, in some of the hallways, they have bars set up to welcome the freshmen in. And how can a young person really survive that kind of thing? There's, boys are in girls' rooms, girls are in boys' rooms. It's just, the whole scenario is shocking. And that's not new. That's been, even when we took our boys, they lived in an athletic dorm for a year, and then we pulled them out of it because it was so awful, really, what was going on. But even when our kids go off to college, there still needs to be a semblance of a covering going on, not just, here you go, we're paying $30,000 a year, and you just do whatever you want to, darling. The next stage of life is marriage. And that's what we've been talking about the covering that should take place as the father of the bride or gives her over to the young man. Actually, he's just switching coverings. That's the way it should be. I failed to tell y'all this story the other day, so I want to tell it to you now. A couple of years ago, a woman called from one of the Midwestern states, and she said, I desperately need help. Can I come? So I remember I was standing in the conference room looking out at the driveway. I heard her drive up, and she got out of the car. And y'all know what a whipped dog looks like, one that's been out in the elements and just been abused and all that kind of thing. That's what she looked like to me when she got out of the car. But she came in here and told me her story. She and her husband had been in ministry for a number of years. And all of a sudden he came in one day and he said, I don't want you anymore. I don't need you anymore. I want you out of here. And so she left. But she told me this incredible story. She said, I'm a crossword puzzle fanatic. And after I left, I went to my parents' home. And back then, y'all, the newspapers would have a crossword puzzle, but you didn't get the answers until the next week, till the next weekly paper came out. Y'all understand that? Well, she said one of the definitions or clues was the opposite of love. Well, she went to write hate, except there were 12 boxes. And she said, I could not, for the life of me, figure out what that was. She said, I waited till the next week when the paper came in. She said, I went immediately to that page to see what the opposite of love was. Of love was indifference. Now that came from a crossword puzzle, man, woman, whoever writes those things. Indifference. And if you put indifference into our marriages, it is a killer. It is the same as Jesus saying, I'd rather have you hot or cold, but lukewarm, I'm going to spit you out. So I think indifference is one of the main things we have to fight against in marriage and in parenting. Because as we all know, marriage just doesn't happen. You just don't step in it and yawn. And I can tell you this, parenting doesn't just happen. You don't just step into it and yawn. It should be hot. The last stage of life of this covering, I've added just because of situations that life, Larry, that's stuck in there. Situations that life brings to us that really we're not trained for, or I should say Larry and I weren't trained for. But it is facing death, and I'm putting this in the context of our parents. That who need covering. It's like we switch roles. And nobody ever told, I don't know, it just never dawned on us that this sort of thing was going to happen. But with 3 of our parents, my mother died suddenly at a young age, so that was not an issue. But with the other 3 of our parents, it required that we cover our parents in that stage that they were going through. And actually, we didn't know how, but we learned as we walked through it. Prior to all this happening, I had a couple of ladies who would call me and they would say, I remember one lady in particular, she said, my sister is in the hospital and they're just letting her die, and her family's they're not giving her liquids, they're not doing anything. Now, y'all, I know there's a stage where perhaps these kind of things have to happen, but the attitude now in this world that we were educated to, even in small towns, is they're old. And just even keeping liquids or that sort of thing in that situation makes an incredible difference. I think that's one of the reasons why the whole abortion thing is important. It isn't just about abortion. It will go into things like handicap. And I can tell you this, in the former administration, euthanasia was already on the books. And, it doesn't stop. It just doesn't stop. So we see, everybody, that covering is an issue all the way through lives that requires of us and hopefully requires of those surrounding us as well. Let me just close. Matthew Henry, again, I'm going to read this quote. He lived from 1662 to 1714. But he saw something way back then. A family without government or covering is like a house without a roof, exposed to every wind that blows. He might better have said, like a house in flames, a scene of confusion and commonly too hot to live in. And that is what is happening so many times now. Our family is just a place of turmoil, because of the lack of covering that God has put in place for all of our well-beings. And finally, Psalm 5:11 and 12 says this, "But let all who take refuge in you be glad. Let them ever sing for joy, and may you shelter and cover them, that those who love your name may exalt in you. For it is you who blesses the righteous man, O Lord. You surround, you cover him with favor as with a child."